Hello and welcome to this episode of A Girl and a Gun, the show for filmmakers and content creators. This week we have a special episode for you. We're not doing our usual show. We actually have recorded a rather lengthy interview with film industry icon David Hannay, and we're going to show part one of that to you right now.
All you need to make a movie is a girl and a gun. Come along and join the party. I will stare at the sun.
Hello and welcome to this special first interview of A Girl and a Gun. We are here speaking with Australian film industry icon David Hannay. Hello, David.
Hello, Phil.
Thank you so much for letting us into your home to do this.
No, absolutely a pleasure.
Now, I do want to start with, just to get something out of the way. We've heard reports recently that you've suffered some ill health. Can you tell us briefly what's going on there?
All terribly boring, but about 7 to 8 months ago, I was told I had esophageal cancer, which is considered to be 100% fatal. But I did say to the oncologist, who we have come to call Dr. Death, who said I had no chance, I said there must be a chance. And he said, well, less than 1%. So I said, well, okay, that's a chance. He said, yes, but he said he had had a patient who was half my age with esophageal cancer, same as me, and he'd opted for the radical treatment that was necessary, and he'd gone ahead with the treatment but was dead. So why at twice that age did I want to even contemplate the radical treatment?
Well, what was the prognosis that he gave you? How long did he give you to live?
Oh, 6 weeks to whatever. He didn't think I had any chance at all. And given that he'd had this patient half my age who had died, who'd had the same problem, he couldn't see the point in that I would go for the radical treatment, because the treatment was going to be horrific. On that he was right. He was not right about about how long I had, but he was certainly right about the treatment. It was absolutely vile.
How long ago was that, from when we're talking now?
Oh, 7 months, 8 months.
So 7, 8 months ago you started this treatment for esophageal cancer.
Yeah.
And where are we now with it?
Well, the primary tumour appears to have been zapped, and the spread into the nodes that went up to my neck has appeared to be zapped. And there's I've had a PET scan. There's a hot spot that needs to be looked at. I'll have a gastroscope and a biopsy, and hopefully that's gone. But essentially, I mean, I have already outlived the dire predictions of Dr. Death. I'm still here. I mean, as I say, he was right about the treatment being vile. It was very radical, and I accepted the fact that the possibility was that the treatment would kill me before it killed the cancer. But at least then I would have a fighting chance, whereas to have gone into palliative care was just not an option. And he had people kind of, in his support system, who were meant to be my support system, who were trying to get me to accept the inevitable. It was suggested I should go into palliative care. I mean, I had a call in the sing-song voice of the social worker. Hello, I'm Nancy. I'm your cancer counsellor from Orange. Can I talk to you? I said, Nancy, you are talking to me. She said, I want to talk to you about acceptance. I said, well, you can hold the phone right there, Nancy. I'm not in denial. I know I'm very ill, but I'm not accepting. I said, have you ever heard of Dylan Thomas? No. Who's that? I said, he's a very famous Welsh poet, and I'm going to quote him to you. I will not go gentle into that good night. I will rage, rage, rage against the dying of the light. Oh, can I come and see you? I was shouting at her by the stage. I said, are you sure you want to see me? Oh, yes. You'll be having your infusion at Daffodil Cottage on Friday. I'll see you then. I said, Nancy, you've got to understand one thing. Those who are not with me are against me. Those who are not for me are my mortal enemies. F*** off! Well, on Friday, she didn't come. But I mean, it was just infuriating. One of the things that has kept me going is my natural predilection to be angry about everything. I was born angry, and anger is something rage is something I've used for energy and to sustain me when I've kind of been down.
Let me use that you seem to be in good health now. You're recovering from it. You've not kicked it completely yet, but
No.
you're on the mend, yes?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I'm a natural. I mean, being a melancholic depressive, which I am, I'm also a natural-born pessimist. The glass is always half empty, unfortunately for me. Fortunately, in my life, I have my wife, Mary Moody, who's a natural-born optimist. The glass is always half full for her. So that we are a good balance in that regard. But
Let me take you back then to the beginnings of all this, the beginnings of that personality, that fighting spirit that you seem to have. Where did that all start? And tell me a bit about your childhood and how you began in this industry.
Well, as I said, I was born angry. I was born in 1939, just before the outbreak of the Second World War. My father disappeared. In fact, every male member of my family disappeared in that early stage of my life, except for my grandfathers, two of which I had. Everybody in the family from 18 through to 50 something was fighting the good fight. I mean, I had an elderly cousin who'd been a lieutenant in France in the First World War, was gassed. He had no need to go to war again. Well, he was a colonel in the Second World War. I mean, so that was just what my family was like. So I grew up in this environment of women and old men, which was not an uninteresting...
Many children of that era.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, because and so it wasn't until after the war that my father came back, and he came back having been horrifically wounded and very disturbed and completely insane with rage, apart from anything else, because he'd been pulled back from Italy, where he had been in the army of occupation, and just loved Italy and thought it would be a good idea if my sister and I and our mother joined him in Rome. But my mother's family had other ideas, so he had to come home. So he came home somewhat enraged, and that affected the relationship. My memory of him before he went to war was, of course, of my father, and he was a warm and big-hearted, generous, open-hearted, warm man. And then when he came back, it was just this angry fellow, and that was terrifying, apart from anything else, because he could go from warmth and generosity of spirit, and he was incredibly attractive and charismatic, to ultra-violence in a nanosecond.
Do you think that affected you a lot at that young age? That influenced your life from that point on?
Oh, clearly so. I mean, it influenced me into becoming a boxer, which I was, because I thought if I'm going to be able to cope with this situation, I have to be able to deck my own father. But
your father was also an actor.
Yes, he was. I mean, he was an actor. He was an immersion actor. He was a method actor. The first book he ever gave me was Stanislavski, An Actor Prepares. So he, whenever he was he didn't act characters. He was always being the person that he.
At home.
Well, at home he was just this incredibly larger than life, sometimes incredibly violent person, who was at the same time incredibly attractive and charismatic. So it was not the best place to grow up in. Not the easiest way to grow.
How old were you when you left home then?
How old when I left home? Well, I left home not quite 17. Well, I left home to go to boarding school.
Oh, right.
At 9, and I was happy at boarding school. In fact, I'm one of the very few people I know who the school holidays came from and we went, shit, I have to go home now. Because I was very comfortable in the boarding school environments that I was in. I enjoyed them. But clearly, I had this ongoing relationship with my father that was both interesting and intellectually stimulating, emotionally stimulating, artistically stimulating, creatively stimulating, and terrifying at the same time. I started working for him as an actor when I was 9. I mean, fundamentally, he was a radio drama producer and director and actor, and he got me involved in radio for children. And the fantastic thing about him is to describe immersion acting was that the easiest thing to do when you direct a child is to tell them what to do. He never told me what to do. He gave me context. He would give me backstory and then say, okay, you work it out, you do it, you be the person that you have to be. So, without going to any school, my school was my father. He was a method actor. He was my tutor in the method.
So he was teaching you radio acting at the age of 9.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, he was just teaching me about acting at the age of 9. Whether it wouldn't have mattered whether it was theatre or film or television or radio. It was the fact that acting is about being the character. Yes, you have to develop craft and you have to develop technique. There's no question about that. You can't be an artist without craft and technique as a bed. But it was the immersion into character that was really important that he gave me. And one of the things that was critical in this regard was me finding out that I could perform myself, and that would make me a more confident person. Because one of the things that I had as a small child, because of terror, fear, what have you, I had a terrible stutter. I stuttered and stammered. I have to tell you that the real King's Speech, which was a documentary made about the people who were Lionel Loeb's patients, if you will, subjects, I think is probably a better way to the real people. I thought the film was terrific as well, but seeing the real King's Speech and seeing these men, often some of them, around about my own age, who'd gone through from being stuttering and stammering to being helped by him.
So how did you overcome stuttering?
I realised that when I was immersed in being a character, I wasn't me. Oh. So at the age of 9, I created a character which was me. So I didn't stutter and stammer. In other words, it was different to the person who stuttered and stammered. It was still me, but it was a representation of me, a character that I built. And that character I've been playing ever since. Except when I get exhausted or upset, and then I still stutter and stammer.
So let me jump ahead a little bit then. How did that character of David Hannay end up getting into behind the camera, so to speak, or behind in production? What was the first thing you produced or were involved in that?
The set and in theatre, I was behind. I did lighting, I did sound, I did stage management, did all of those things in the theatre as well as being an actor. I always knew that I had to have other things to do apart from being an actor. I didn't think that was going to sustain me. Also, I loved to act, but I hated being an actor, inasmuch as you were manipulated, you were pushed around, you were degraded, you were demeaned. And one of the things I felt I might be able to do when I became a producer was to actually make it better for actors, because the point that the point of working in the environment, particularly in early television, which I did, where you would have somebody he'd been. This is not his fault, I hasten to put it. They were all men, not his fault. He might be doing the footy on Saturday. He did the epilogue on Sunday night, and on Monday he'd turn up at the church hall where we were going to rehearse a play or a TV series, and to direct drama. And we used to call them camera pointers, because that's fundamentally what they were. And I can remember, they would set it up for the 3 pedestal cameras in the TV studios that exist, these huge bloody pedestal cameras, and they were, 3 positions and with very little ability to move. And so the actor was meant to, sort of nose to the grindstone, shoulder to the wheel, but best foot forward. Very difficult to be a character if you're trying to do all these things and being physically manipulated into a position that suited the camera position. And I would always be arguing with these people, saying, have you read the script? Well, yes, of course I've read the script. Well, you haven't understood the script because my character wouldn't do what you're wanting me to do physically. It won't work for me. And all the other actors were going, oh shit, Hannay's at it again. As I said, I was angry. So when I had the opportunity to move into production, because Roger Ward was with whom I was working in television on a show at Channel 7 at the time. This is in 1967, 68. Said, look, I've written this thing, and this guy, Frank Britton, who's made this film, Journey Out of Darkness, as a producer, now is going to direct it. And he needs somebody to come in and work with him in the production. I mean, and because I'd all been talking to him about being a producer and what I was going to do. And
so you did have ambitions back then to do...
Oh, no, I had ambitions about... Well, fundamentally, I considered that the best way to be employed in this business was to be your own boss, because fundamentally we're all unemployable unless we give ourselves our own work. So I wanted to create both an environment for myself to be employed, and an environment in which the people I loved, which was actors, other actors, had a better environment in which to work. I mean, you don't see anybody else on a screen other than an actor. That's what you see. Now, actors are the most vulnerable of all artists because they don't have a paintbrush like a painter. They don't have an instrument like a musician to come through. Their instrument is their body, their voice, their physicality, who they are. They have nothing other than themselves to help them represent their art. And it's the job of everybody behind camera to support that, to provide a crucible in which the flame of the actor will burn to represent what hopefully are the writer's brilliant words,
So what was the first project you were able to really start bringing that philosophy to life?
The Set in 1968.
We go so well together. I love you.
Cara?
Wear it. Always.
Now, that was a feature film. I mean, that was my first feature, was 1968. I didn't get to do another feature film until 1973. But then after that, I worked extensively in television, which was like my film school. I mean, I was very fortunate in as much as I was able to go and work in television after having done The Set. But The Set certainly set me up. To become a producer, because apart from anything else, Frank Britton, who had produced but never directed before and was the producer-director, just basically said, well, I'm directing, so you're going to have to do everything else. So I did. I mean, and because we were working on minimal budget, I was the exec in charge of production, the executive producer, I was the production manager, I taught myself accounting, so I could actually run the books. I didn't know anything about. I'm not an accountant. I'm still not an accountant, but I certainly worked out how to be a production accountant and keep track of everything. I also immersed myself in the entire process, from from the development of the screenplay with Roger and Frank, from the raising of the money with Frank, from the pre-producing the picture and getting everything together, the crewing and everything, the shoot, all the way through to post-production, through to delivery. So on my first picture, I was able to go from development through to delivery, and learned a huge amount about making pictures. I mean, when I was working on shows like The Battlers and You Can't See Round Corners, I met a whole coterie of people who became absolutely critical and significant to me, who were actors. Ken Shorter, who was Stone in Stone. Sandy Harbert, who wrote, produced, directed, designed and wrote the lyrics for Stone. To my mind, probably the only person in Australian film history who really can call himself an auteur, because he did everything. Writer, producer, director, actor, designer, lyricist. You can't do more than that. And we worked together as actors. Helen Morse, who was his wife and business partner at that time. Carmen Duncan, Vincent Gill, Roger Waters, I've mentioned, James H. Bowles. These were all, I mean, there was a whole coterie. There's a book called Good Companions, which is about actors on the road. Well, that's one of the things about a group of actors. I mean, you become an organic entity, and you're part of each other, and you support each other. So I met a whole lot of people working at Seven, which I did a lot of in the middle to late 60s. Channel 7 was a place of enormous energy and so much going on. My name's Magooly. Rita and Wally mentions, I've already mentioned You Can't See Round Corners, and
all those names you just mentioned, I think every one of them was involved in Stone.
Most of them were, yes.
So let's jump to that if you don't mind.
Yes, well, but that was 1973, but I had to kind of get there. I mean, we're talking about 67 through to 68, 69, and then through to 68, 60 to 70, which was a period I worked on the set. Then in 1970, I started to work in producing in television. And I joined up with Robert Bruning, absolutely incredibly significant person in my life, and Michael Lawrence. And they had been actors, and they'd written a show to do together called The Godfathers, but they had no experience of actual physical production. They'd certainly had a lot of experience as actors. And they certainly knew what they wanted to achieve. Now, they were doing a show called Robert Bruning was doing a show called The Long Arm of the Law, and Sandy Harbert played Kim Riverton, this young biker cop, in that show. And during the course of the show, Sandy had written an episode for himself to play, in which he would be the lead. The show got canned, and Robert and Michael, fortunately, the timing for them was right. They went to Channel 9, and Clyde Packer liked the idea of the show, The Godfathers, and said, "Okay, I'll back a pilot." Robert and Michael, as I said, had no physical production experience, but Michael Pate and Sandy Harbert had been working with them on The Long Arm. So both of them went to see Michael Pate, who'd been a mentor of mine, and Sandy, of course, who was a mate, and said, "Is there anybody you know who could help us put the show together, do all the physical stuff?" And both of them said, "Yes, Hannay." So I got the gig to do the pilot. And clearly I did a good job, because when the show got picked up, Robert came back and said, well, he actually said why we're doing the pilot. He said, "This is really working very well. You know, would you be interested in doing the show if it gets picked up?" And I did say to him, I said, look, what I'm really interested in, Robert, is making movies. But yeah, of course, if you get the show, and I'm interested. But you've got to understand, my primary function is what I want to do in life is be a movie producer. He said, fine. Anyhow, the show got picked up, and so I got the gig. Now, the point about Robert was, and this is important that I make it clear, despite most people, when they give you a job, say, okay, that's it, no other interest other than what you're working for me now, you're my associate producer, you're my head of production, we're making this show, you got no time for anything else. But he always knew that I wanted to make pictures, and he knew, because of course he'd worked with Sandy on the Long Arm, and the episode that Sandy had written for him to star in as Kim Riverton, as the bikie cop, was now becoming Stone, with Ken Shorter playing the bikie cop. So, and he was aware of all of this, but he was supportive. Robert was supportive of Sandy and me. I mean, for example, during the course of the 3 years I worked with Robert, 1973 to 73, on 72 episodes of The Godfathers.
Is that how long it lasted?
Yes, 72 episodes of Godfathers, 13 of The Spoiler, the Bob Monkhouse Show, the Marty Feldman Show, the Kenneth Connor Show, all the comedy variety shows that I did, and also, but really specifically beyond that was Crisis and Poor Tony, both of which starred Helen Morse and Sandy Harbert, and Derek Barnes, of course, who played the politician who was assassinated in Stone. And another early mentor of mine, with whom I worked when I first started in the business as an extras casting assistant on the summer of the 17th Doll back in 1958, and in that Derek played Bluey, one of the cane cutters. Anyhow, jumping back to what we were talking about. So Robert gave Helen and Sandy work, and he gave me work, given that he knew we were all going to make this movie sometime, hopefully in the not too distant future. He also we got the gig to produce a documentary that took Robert Stigwood and Harry M. Miller's production of Jim Sharman's Jesus Christ Superstar from rehearsals all the way through to its opening night at the Capitol. He gave Sandy the co-director job on that. This is a person who, I cannot begin to tell you how important Robert Bruning was in all of our lives. So he gave me this job, he gave me this opportunity, he gave me fantastic environment in which to hone my skills, so that by the time the 3 years that I spent working with Robert, 70 to 73, which finished off with 20-something episodes of the People Next Door, I was cooking. I was ready to do something with Sandy that was really good.
Right,
So
that was the genesis of what became this.
Yes.
Stone the movie.
But now, somebody wants them dead, all of them. So the cops sent Stone.
It's a pig.
Yeah, that's right, I'm a cop. I've been sent to find out who's been killing your mates.
Why would you want to know that?
That's the way I earn my living.
The whole reason we're outlaws is because we're against pigs and everything a pig is. So how are we going to do our thing with you pigging around us?
Ken Shorter is Stone, working undercover on a deadly mission. Sandy Harbert is the undertaker, leader of the gravediggers.
Your law sends young blokes to somebody else's country to fight people they know nothing about. As long as you keep on shooting them, they hang medals on you. When you don't shoot them anymore, they shut you in jail.
The cop and the bike gang. Two lifestyles clash in a suspense thriller you cannot predict.
What's the score, man? You got a pro after you.
Go on, man.
Look, man, I didn't want any trouble.
Well, why don't you do something honest, like sell used cars to old ladies?
I'll kill you.
You think we're a pack of imbeciles, don't you?
I'll kill you!
Stone is different. Take the trip.
Topic for you now. This was a major hit at the time. It's still a cult classic.
I mean, that's the interesting. Most cult films aren't successful when they come out. They become cult films. It was a commercial hit, but it's become a cult classic. It's still a picture which people who I mean, the picture's nearly 40 years old, and it'll be 40 years next year. As from the time we actually shot it. It's considerably more than that. If we go back to 1970, it's 70 when we actually started working on it. But the relationship with Sandy was incredible, because it started as actors on You Can't See Round Corners in 67, and the energy and the passion in the relationship, let alone what we were wanting to do, went from 67 through to the shoot in 73 to the release in 74. Now, he is unquestionably the most inspirational person I've ever had anything to do with.
Sandy Harbour.
Yes. Absolutely the most inspirational person. Because he fired everybody up. I mean, we made it on a pretty small budget. It wasn't. I mean, when I say small budget, it kissed $200,000, but it looks like millions of dollars. How was this possible? Because apart from anything else, I mean, we got together, and we were able to inspire and involve whole lots of people. We got incredible levels of support from. I mean, let's take the military for example. Sandy and I went to have lunch one day in the mess at Chowder Bay with a major who just returned from Vietnam. Now we looked like old bikers, long hair, what have you. We were taken to the officers' mess for lunch. He was so inspired by what Sandy said about what we were trying to do. We were making a picture about disenfranchised, alienated men who'd become outlaw bikers because when they came back from Vietnam, they had been rejected by the society they fought for. This guy had a Vietnam, he'd just come back, he was a major, he'd had a Vietnam ribbon. So he saw these two guys who looked like what we looked like, with the beards and the long hair.
You had a beard at that stage?
Oh, huge. It was down to, it sat on my thighs, it was so big. And so there's Harbert and I, we sort of turned up at Chowder Bay, and not only did we get that fantastic environment, which was the fort, given to us by the military on Middle Head, which was all military land, and it's now a national park. But then it was it was administered from Chowder Bay. Not only that, but he gave us generators from the military, so we actually could light everything. We didn't have to hire generators. So we got we got that whole environment, no location fees, nothing.
They also gave you transport across the harbour for a new beach thing or something?
Yes,
well?
all of that.
But you guys also got a special sponsorship from the bike manufacturer?
Yes, well, I mean, Michael Robinson, who co-wrote it with Sandy, Michael and Sandy had worked together at McCann Ericsson's and in advertising, and they'd had a long relationship. Now, Michael was writing copy for the Kawasaki, so Michael and Sandy were able to, again, to convince the managing director of Kawasaki Australia that this brand new bike that hadn't even arrived in Australia yet, which was the Z900 Kawasaki, was going to get featured. So this was going to be the best product placement they could possibly have. We couldn't have afforded those bikes. In no way in the world we could have afforded those bikes. But Sandy and Michael managed to convince this guy, not only could we have the bikes, we could customise them.
Every bike had its own paintwork.
Yeah, every bike was customised to the character who was who was riding it, whether it was Hooks or Mr. Toad, Hooks,
Dr. Death.
Dr. Death actually. Dr. Death didn't rode on the. He didn't ride because he only had one eye. He rode on the back of Hooks's bike, but Hooks, of course, was Roger Ward. Mr. Toad was Hugh Keysburn.
And these are, like, again, just going back to the cast, Roger Ward, Hugh Keysburn, these are stalwarts of the Australian industry back then. They were in just about every film.
Yes. Oh no, they were just, you know, and again, you know, my relationship with most of them had come from 1960s TV, specifically at both 7 and also 9. But it was, you know, it was just incredible that we were able to get all these things together.
And I also noted from the behind the scenes, the F3 had just opened up, and they had the funeral sequence where all the bikes are going up the F3, and they just invited everyone.
Well, what happened again? What happened is again, this was a lot to do with Sandy's being inspirational. We got the straight press and the bent motorcycle press, revs, two wheels, and what have you, to support us in getting the word out that we were going to do a funeral sequence on the
Gosford Freeway.
The Gosford. Well, it was then a tollway, but partly, but for the Gosford going up from the Barara toll gates up to over the Brooklyn Bridge and back again, and fundamentally, you know, we were at. First thing in the morning at the Barara toll gates, hoping that somebody was going to turn up. Oh, not just had we put out the ads in the motorcycle press, we also had Bob Rogers had gone on radio, and John Laws had gone on radio because they were supporters. Again, Sandy had known John Laws from when he was at McCann Erickson, of course, who of course did all the Mortine ads, and of course John Laws was famous for that, and they were mates, John Laws and Sandy. Also, Bob Rogers was another mate. So when we needed something, they would actually do an appeal. Now, one of the appeals they made, that both of them made, was along with the stuff we got in the motorcycle press about this big day, was. And we didn't have.
How many were you expecting to turn up?
We had no idea who was going to turn up. We were there, just the gravediggers, our gang of actors as bikers, and we're just hoping that, you know, somebody would turn up. Anyhow, they started to come, you know, and they started to come, and they started to come. But I really knew how effective we had been when I saw these dusty blokes, really dusty, and I looked at the patch on their backs and it said, Desert Rats, Normanton, Gulf of Carpentaria. That's one hell of a long way to come to be in a picture. People came from everywhere, but I'm just talking about the day, just because we weren't being worried about how many people we could get. And they called...
How many overall was it roughly?
Well, they call themselves, those who were there on the day, the 400. That's what they call themselves. These guys, I'm talking about, you know, nearly 40 years later. I mean, I can be standing in a gas station and somebody will see me and come up to have a chat, you know, after he's filled up his bike and say, oh, you know, another one of the 400's gone. because of course they do die.
Because
But
they were one of the ones in that.
in that team, they are. That's special. That's the point. That's what they call themselves, the 400. But it was all to do with the inspiration of one man, Sandy Harvey. And this is the thing that people need to get, as far as I'm concerned. We all came together and we were inspired to do the very best we could by this person. And he and Sandy and I, well, obviously we did all the pre together, and we did, talk to the cops. That's the other thing. The cops, you've seen the picture. We were racing round bloody roads and having all kinds of shit.
Right up and down
and remember the sequence in the graveyard. Hey, Undertaker, here come the pigs, man. I mean, and then we took the piss out of it. We took the piss out of them, and they still supported us. Again, because somehow or another, we were able to go to the police public relations and get them on the case, get them to understand what we were doing. Yes, we're going to take the piss out of you, but this is
the lead character is a cop.
The lead character is a cop, and this is really an important thing. We come to everybody. We came to the bikies with respect. We came to the cops with respect. Everybody got respect. We didn't fudge things. We didn't say that everybody's terrific, everybody's lovely. We were completely honest about the culture we were going to do. But again, it was all about Sandy's inspiration of everybody.
So once the film was in the can, getting it out there, what was the process of getting that, in those days, a feature film like this distributed?
Well, I mean, before the picture was shot, it had a distribution deal with Greater Union, with BEF, which was then the distribution arm of Greater Union. So there was a deal already in place before we shot the picture. Again, all to do with Sandy being inspirational and being the best salesman of his own work that any human being could be. I mean, we were just incredibly fortunate. I mean, we had Greater Union as the distributor. We had the Australian Film Development Corporation as primary investor. We had Ross Wood Productions as the studio out of which we worked. Now, Ross Wood was one of the great cameramen, Australian iconic cameramen of all time, and he came and he gave us his place, his studio, and his people to support us to make the film. So, I mean, it was just an incredible experience when we came to release the film through Greater Union. In those days, a 17 print release was, a big release. Now, and in those days, the prints, went on buses and trains all around from, one place to another. But there was a guy called Jim Shakespeare who was in charge of physical distribution at Greater Union, who taught me everything I knew about physical distribution. I mean, if it finished in Dubbo on Wednesday, he wanted to make sure that the print was in orange on Thursday, because he didn't want those prints never to be not working. Every day, all of those prints were working somewhere. I mean, 11 prints in the drive-ins in Victoria. In the first, in the first weekend, we broke 12 box office records. The first weekend of its release, despite the fact that critics hated the picture.
Oh, of course.
I mean, there were, incredibly negative. We got headlines, I don't mean...
Good publicity, though.
Oh, yeah, it'd be like Stone the Crows, this movie is a stinker. Australian film industry crashes with bike gang epic. Those kind of headlines you could feel pretty hurt by, but and that was the weekend press. But on Monday, 12 box office records had been broken, and there were people who just kept on coming back and seeing it time and time again.
Plus, one of the things is that it appeals to a certain subculture, which is a very big subculture.
Well, it was. I mean, if it had only appealed to people who rode motorcycles, it would have lasted, big for 2 weeks. I mean, it was big for months. It was big for years. I mean, it cut across just being a genre film. It crossed genre. Clearly it was political because it had the background of the bikies being Vietnam vets. So it did have a political resonance. It had, and it certainly was as has been described by a critic in America as pure motorcycle erotica. So clearly it got that. It got the culture. And that was the other thing about Sandy. He just got into the culture. He understood it and he respected it. You got to
One of the most surprising things was the morality in it, especially. I don't want to give it away for those who haven't seen the film, but the way it finishes is a very surprising.
Yes,
twist.
well, I mean, of course, Quentin Tarantino points that up in Not Quite Hollywood, that it had this incredible, amazing moral end to the film. And of course, yes, we won't talk about what it is. Spoiler alert, no, we won't go there. That's the rehearsal portrait of me that was done in 2007 for the Archer Board by a Chinese artist called Qi Ming. When he approached me first, I thought, oh, that'll be interesting, I'll get some kind of Chinese representation. But when he actually came back after talking to me and going away, and when he came back with this it was a rehearsal painting. I thought, oh, what a fantastic impressionistic painting. It really got me, my expressions, the kind of person I am. When he showed me the final painting, it was about 2 meters tall because he said the Archer Board likes big things, but it was more representational, and to me it was never as good. But I'm happy to have the rehearsal painting because it's beautiful. It's a stunning picture. And this is a portrait by a woman called Deborah MacArthur Young, that's 20-something years ago. She wasn't a portrait painter, but she again got me. What she saw was the melancholic depressive, which is very prescient. And frankly, given that was 20 years ago, I'm actually look much more like that now than I did then. So she could see where I was going, but she could also see the dark black moods and the old soul of me. There you are.
Let me move on then.
Yeah.
The precursor to this was a little documentary called Kung Fu Killers.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Well, yes, but you need to go back to the time I worked at Channel 9 with Robert Bruning. In 1970, when we got the pickup for the show, this bloke bounced into my office, which was in the caravan. I used to make jokes that I could always be pulled off the lot, because initially my office was a caravan in the car park at 9. Did later get a cottage when we got to be successful. But on one of the first days after we got the contract to make the show, and we were actually getting in for doing the series, with the pilot, this bloke bounced into my office and said, "Hello, I'm Brian Trenchard Smith, and I'm going to make your promos." So that's when I met Brian. Literally almost my first day at 9. And sometimes sometimes you click with people and sometimes you don't. Well, Brian and I just clicked. And so out of our relationship, which started at the very beginning of us being picked up to make The Godfathers, Brian became part of my ongoing life, and and I was this part of what I did on The Godfathers was coordinate all the publicity and all the promotions. I did everything. I mean, Robert and Michael concentrated on script and acting in it, and I was in charge of all the physical shit, all the physical production, which, as I said, was also my film school. So, because a lot of the things I didn't know, I mean, I was doing shit every day that, I mean, I've never done this before, but, you know, dive into the deep end and swim and hope I don't sink. So that was the other great thing about Robert. He enabled me to take risks because he trusted me. That's trust. It's such an important thing that you give people, because if you don't trust them, they won't function as well as they might. If you trust them and enable them to take risks, they will do better than you ever expected them to be. Rise to the challenge. Most people can. Most people will, because you don't want to fuck up. You do fuck up, of course, and I've fucked up more times than I care to think about. In fact, as I've often said, I've made more mistakes. When I'm lecturing to a room full of students, one of the things I always say is, I have made more mistakes than all of you together have had hot dinners. You learn nothing from getting it right. You only learn from your mistakes. Anyhow, so Brian and I met at that beginning moment at 9, and our relationship evolved through that. And then we were making a series about a rogue cop called The Spoiler, with Bruce Barry and Slim de Grey, who was, of course, in Stone playing a cop as he was in The Spoiler. Bruce Barry was this rogue...
By the way, I forgot to ask you this. You had a small part in Stone.
Yes.
I could not spot you.
I'm one of the gunmen at the end of the picture, but I'm also working on a hot Mercedes when Bellini comes round to pick up people.
I'll have to look again.
Anyhow, no, it's not obviously me. Although that was a funny moment. The police public relations hadn't told the local cops that we were filming that gun battle in the Gore Hill Cemetery, and of course they came streaming. There I am with my long nose Colt 45 in the boiler suit, because I'm playing a mechanic who's also a gunny, and the cops turn up and, "Who's in charge?" And Sandy says, "He is." And there I am with the long hair, the beard, the boiler suit, and the Colt 45. Anyhow, Brian Trenchard Smith. So we were working on. So we were doing, and we'd often talked about what we were going to do. We did the Marty Feldman show together as well as. And we were always talking about doing something together, and apart from him making the promos and me doing whatever I was doing. And The Spoiler, of course, was in a way was the genesis of The Man from Hong Kong. It was a rogue cop, not entirely the same. But the important thing is that Brian got involved with making an extended promo, which is like a 15-minute little doco about The Spoiler, which had lots of stunts in it, and which of course Brian loved. And Brian, being a promo maker, and he also worked as a trailer maker in the UK. Brian, despite his English persona, is Australian. His father was a wing commander during the Second World War, who'd married an English woman and had stayed in England. So he went to an English public school, Wellington College, which is how he got to be so terribly upper-class English, but he was as Australian as Vegemite anyway. But he'd worked in trailers in England, then come out to Australia and worked in promos, because in television. And during the course of my relationship, piss off, Sid. During the course of the building of our relationship, from promos to doing this extended promo, little mini doc on The Spoiler with all the stunts and everything in it, out of this came the fact that we were going to do this picture called The Man from Hong Kong. Well, it wasn't The Man from Hong Kong at that stage. We just had the idea it was going to be a genre cop movie.
Right.
Initially, and I don't even know if Brian might remember this, but it could have been The Man from Harlem. Because, of course, Shaft
Right.
big. I mean, the pictures of the moment were blaxploitation, and of course we were looking to get into that genre area.
Well, the big influence on this one was Bruce Lee in the martial arts.
Yes,
films of that period.
well. Then after I went off to do Stone, and Roberts, shook my hand and said, "Good luck, fantastic. Yes, you're going to go and do it." And off we went to do Stone, of course. And that just happened to be the moment at which Brian also left Nine and went to Greater Union to make their trailers. And of course, what was big? The Kung Fu movies, and Greater Union had all the Kung Fu movies. The first thing that Brian did, apart from making trailers of the Kung Fu movies, was make the World of Kung Fu, which and that inspired the movement of the World of Kung Fu.
Which is Kung Fu Killers.
No. Kung Fu Killers came later.
Oh, something else. Okay.
Yeah, no. Kung Fu Killers was we made. I wasn't involved in World of Kung Fu. I was off doing Stone at that stage.
Right.
Although the other factor, of course, is that it must be noted is that Brian's our ongoing relationship. Brian did the original making of Stone.
Yes.
So, which was for Greater Union and Nine. And of course, the voice was John Lawless, Sandy's mate. All of these things coming together. So Brian got backing from Nine, as well as Greater Union, to do the making of Stone, of course. And so my relationships at that period were kind of intertwined. Anyhow, so by the time, and Brian and I had been talking about making this picture together, and Brian had set himself up inside GU and had talked to John Fraser, the head of distribution at GU at the time, about me, and in December. No, November, December, whenever it was. No, it must have been December in '73. David Williams, who was head of exhibition at GU, and John Fraser, who was head of distribution, came to watch a cut of Stone, and of course were delighted with it. And they asked me at that time, would I come to Greater Union? Because apart from anything else, they'd like me to. They were obviously delighted with Stone. And they got the very good rap from Brian about me to come and work with him at Greater Union on what then became, of course, was becoming The Man from Hong Kong. So while I was doing Stone, I was having all these conversations with Brian about where we could go. So at the beginning of '74, I joined Greater Union as general manager of the movie company, which had been set up specifically as the new production entity at GU. Also as head of production for Greater Union in a general sense, as a corporate executive, but also there I was being able to work on the promotion and the marketing of Stone. So it was a fantastic. So everything was dovetailing, and apart from anything else, of course, is I was bringing my relationships that I had on Stone to The Man from Hong Kong.
One thing what we've spoken about so far demonstrates is those relationships you established very early in your career in the theatre and then definitely in the television. No, those early successes and what you explained at GU, Greater Union, all of that's come from those relationships.
Yes, everything. Our business is all about relationships. It's all about right place, right time.
So right place, right time for this, because this was a big hit in its day. No,
it was the most expensive Australian picture. It cost 3 times as much as most Australian pictures did. Well, I mean, we were shooting Sydney, Ayers Rock, and Hong Kong.
Do you remember what the budget was?
Yeah, but it's. I mean, I'm not, I mean, of course, I remember what the original budget was, and it went, and we needed another third above that to realise the whole film. But what I can say is, in the context of what Australian films cost at that time, it cost around about 3 times as much as other pictures. It was shot scope. That was the first Australian picture to be shot scope.
And it had, as one of its leads, you know, the man who had just been James Bond.
Yes, it had George Lazenby. I mean, it didn't have Bruce Lee because Bruce had died.
It was the plan to have Bruce Lee in the lead role?
Well, it would have been pretty amazing if we could have had him, but that wasn't going to happen. He died while we were still in development and financing. Wang Yu, who we did have, had established himself as a star and as a producer-director star in his own movies. The 12 of them. I think half of them were the one-armed swordsman, and the other half were the one-armed boxer. I think six of one, half a dozen of the other. But he was already a huge Asian star, Wang Yu. He'd been a stuntman. He wasn't a great artist the way Bruce was. Bruce was a spiritual being. I mean, let's be clear about this. Bruce was special. Wang Yu was could do all the stuff, but he came out of being a stuntman at Shaw Brothers initially.
Like many of the people, like Jackie Chan, and even Sammo Hung is even in this.
Well, Sammo, of course, was the
courier at the beginning,
and of course he was very much involved in choreographing, the kung fu, and of course he subsequently became a huge star, both not just in Chinese cinema, but also in American television, and also a director. Anyhow, but I mean, this was Brian's first film. I mean, and when I looked at it again recently, I just was going, this is an amazing first film. This is an extraordinary first film.
Well, I was commenting to you earlier that the car chase sequence in particular, it's like, to this day, it stands up as one of the most frenetic, outrageously dangerous car races ever.
Well, that's the other thing, of course. We didn't have to deal with occupational health and safety in those days.
Nobody is safe from the man from Hong Kong.
Listen, there's a Chinese cop in town. He's beginning to annoy me. Yeah, I think he should meet with a slight accident.
Jimmy Wong Yu is the man from Hong Kong. A furious arsenal of martial arts, with his sights set on smashing organized crime.
In my country, Caroline, we have a sport. We take the giant praying mantis, put him in the wooden cage, and make him fight for his life with his own kind. I thought you would enjoy such a sport.
You and Jack Wilton in a wooden cage. He's a very dangerous man.
George Lazenby is Jack Wilton. Gunrunner, dope peddler, ruthless czar of international evil.
I've never met a Chinese yet that didn't have a yellow streak.
East meets West in a head-on clash with no holds barred. Golden Harvest, who made Bruce Lee a box office smash, have joined with Australia's action specialists to produce a death-defying spectacle that staggers the senses. The man from Hong Kong knows no rules. Everyone he runs across is never quite the same again.
I understand the gunman is dead. How did that happen?
I killed him.
Really? Well, in that case, you deserve a cigar.
Thank you. I don't smoke.
Tell me, Inspector, do you often take white girls to bed?
Only on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
This is nice.
What did you expect? Acupuncture?
So do yourself a favor and answer a few questions.
省点劲儿吧，等你妈来陪我，我也不会告诉你。
Yeah, and I love you too.
This is Australia, mate, not 55 days at Peking.
Hey, don't give me any shit.
Provoke him at your peril.
I want that lunatic stopped.
Nothing stands in his way. For long. Nobody's safe. From the man from Hong Kong.
I mean, that's the other thing. There was no CGI. I mean, everything in The Man from Hong Kong that you physically see was physically done. It couldn't be done any other way. And the car chase is replicated, or not shot for shot, but pretty much replicated, including down to Quentin Tarantino getting a Dodge, which was similar to the Chrysler Valiant that we had.
In Death Proof.
In Death Proof. Yeah. I mean, and of course Brian gets a thank you credit at the end of Death Proof. So I mean, you know, one of the great things about Quentin Tarantino is in his delight at movies of another generation, which inspired him, and his homage to them.
Well, the other big chase in this that astounded me was earlier in the film. There's an on-foot race.
Yes,
with Grant Page.
Oh, fantastic! Running around and ending up in the
jumping
Chinese.
on cars, fighting in the kitchen, throwing pots and pans at each other.
Absolutely extraordinary. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, and Grant, we had two stunt directors, of course, Grant being one, and Peter Armstrong, who of course was also the stunt director on Stone, who of course he did that fantastic
motorcycle leap,
motorcycle leap, which is just unparalleled, most brilliant stunt that I've ever been part of. Because that's another story. But you're going back to Brian and the car chases. I mean, again, Brian, you know, loving stunts and having made all these trailers, he knew physically. When you work as an editor, you actually understand how to construct things, and you can go out and shoot stuff because you know what you're going to do with it when you get into the cutting room. And of course, it's not just in the physical doing of it out on the location, it is the putting together of it when you've got all those shots.
And also, I remember the climax of this, which is in the trailer, but you see George Lazenby on fire.
Yes.
And the song from the film was amazing.
I mean, British Jigsaw was Sky High, which of course is perfect, because again, but let's not have a spoiler alert, we'll ruin the end of the film for people who haven't seen it.
And many other actors that came from Stone were in lots of films, like Rebecca Gibling.
Rebecca, I mean, the people who went from one picture to the other, Hugh Keysburn, Roger Ward, Rebecca Gilling, Derek Barnes, David Brax,
all these same faces,
and various stunt people as well. So for me, I mean, clearly there was a whole kind of thing from Channel 7 in the middle 60s, getting together with a whole group of people, segueing to working with Robert Bruning at 9, and the support he gave us to transition to doing Stone, meeting Brian at 9, and then and The Man from Hong Kong. So everything, it was just it was a trip that started in 67 and went all the way through to the release of The Man from Hong Kong in 75. It was just absolutely tight And I couldn't have been more lucky than to have been there through this period. And a lot of it, and as I say, a lot of it was right time, right place. I mean, if Sandy hadn't been working with Robert Bruning on the Long Arm, I wouldn't have got the gig with Robert, which enabled me to make a living and give me the time to hone skills, so that by the time we got to do Stone and The Man from Hong Kong, I actually knew a little bit about what I was doing. Because we all were learning while doing. There were no film schools. There was just, I mean, do you know what you're doing? Well,
Well, you learned it in television. That was your first.
Yeah. I mean, by tomorrow I'll know what I was doing, because I'll be doing it and learning it today. And yes, I mean, so it was. I mean, the genesis of my career, which is clearly well documented.
And we're still very early in your career.
Yeah, well, we're very well documented in Mark Hartley's brilliant documentary, Not Quite Hollywood. But it was just, I couldn't, as far as I'm concerned, I just could not have been more lucky than to be be wherever I was at any given moment, that I bumped into the person who was going to take me to the next point of the journey, and then bring in the people that were already on the journey with me.